this is going to be my first video. So today I'm actually going to be talking about triple dispels in W101. So as you all know, there are 7 schools of magic. So there are these things called dispels. Let me see if I can pull one of them. So the dispel, basically what it does, it will prevent the target of the dispel from using another spell. I can't seem to get one. Okay. Well, I have it trained. Alright, so, here. This is a dispel. This one right here. This spell will prevent your opponent from using a balance spell, but there's one for every school. So there's going to be a death dispel, a life dispel, a myth dispel, storm dispel, ice and fire dispel. Now they cost 2 pips. Undoubtedly, they are pretty useful, but balance wizards, they get triple dispels. So they get these two, Spirit Diffuse and Elemental Diffuse. It's a 5 pip spell, and for 3 dispels, each dispel is worth 2 pips, right? So that means if you use 3 dispels, then you'd be using 6 pips, but in an Elemental Diffuse and a Spirit Diffuse, it's 5 pips. Now, that might seem like it's worth it, but it may not actually be worth it to use one of these dispels. One of these spells. So, you should notice that, we'll analyze the elemental dispel. So the elemental diffuse. So dispels ice, storm, and fire spells. So let's talk about this. Okay, so in PvP, what spells would you normally use? So ice dispel, that will definitely be used up. Your opponent won't be able to use a shield. They might not use a steel ward if they're an ice, then they'll definitely be affected by the ice dispel. That's 2 pips of its cost being worth it. Then there's a storm dispel. The storm dispel, it's I guess you can't use enfeeble. You can't use cleanse charm. Let me see any storm chariot cards. Well, you can't use maybe storm prism, storm shield, I guess. So if you're a storm with the balance master, you could use this spell. You can't use disarm, but that's really not much. Then there's also the fire spell that gets this spell. So for fire spells, there's not much you can really dispel unless they're a fire wizard. If it's a fire and ice, then if it's a fire wizard, it'll use ice spells to defend. Pretty much every school uses tower shield. Then it will also use, if it blades up and hits, then it'll probably use a cleanse charm somewhere, in which case you might want to use it, but otherwise that's a very specific situation. Only if you're going against a fire, all 3 dispels will be used. If it's lower level, they might be using a Storm Mastery or something. So if it's an ice with the Storm Mastery, they're probably going to blade up, and they're going to use a cleanse charm. I don't know. It could happen like that. There's a very specific situation for its use. But Spirit Diffuse, on the other hand, is a bit, I think, in my opinion, much better. Spirit Diffuse, it dispels a myth, life, and death spell. So some wizards use myth spells to stun. So for example, I believe I have to pull it. Yeah, they could use Legendary Treant if they have a myth mastery, maybe. Death wizards, they commonly have a myth mastery. They might use their myth mastery to they could Minotaur possibly at lower levels, so it'd be useful at whatever level you get the Spirit Diffuse. So if it's a death wizard, it might have a life mastery or myth mastery. So if it has myth mastery, it's definitely going to be useful, because then it'll prevent them from healing. It could also, if you're a life wizard with a bounce mastery, you can also prevent them from using a life dispel on you. It'll prevent them from using infection on you. If it's a death wizard, then they won't use their own spells or one of their own spells. And if they're a myth wizard, if they have a myth mastery, they're not going to use a Minotaur. If you time it right, they'll lose 5 pips too. It's like a mana burn. At lower levels, it's a very effective mana burn, but you have to time it very, very carefully. So you also must note that life wizards, life wizards, they don't use life masteries. They will probably they'll use like a balance mastery or something. So it's not going to be as effective against them. they're not going to use, maybe they'll use an infection if they're an offensive build, but you don't see that very often. Also, the life dispel is pretty much universal because the pet might have a healing talent. My pet, it's a damage pet, but it does still have a healing talent because it did fail. So it'll prevent your opponent from healing. That's pretty helpful. Pretty much all wizards, they will use infection. That's a dispel that prevents your opponent from healing as much. So it prevents them from using that spell too. And they also cannot stun you. So they might use a Myth Banshee. I've seen a lot of people use Myth Banshee, even at this upper level. So it's very common. So honestly, so my verdict is like, so Spirit Diffuse is much more effective than Elemental Fuse. If I had space, I would use like maybe 2 Spirit Diffuse and 1 Elemental. I'd always use the Spirit over the Elemental one. That concludes it. I hope you liked the video. And if you find it useful, you might want to use these spells and just test it out in PvP. Just keep these facts in mind. Leave a like, subscribe, comment, do whatever you want. Bye.